Hello, welcome to our AMA, our Ask Microsoft Anything. My name is Craig Lowen. I'm a program manager working at Microsoft on the Windows subsystem for Linux, and I am joined today by some other awesome WSL folks. Let's start with Ben Hillis. Do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, thanks, Craig. I'm Ben Hillis. I'm the lead of the Linux on Windows team at Microsoft, which is the team that's responsible for Windows subsystem for Linux.
Awesome. And then Owen.
Hi, my name's Owen. I'm a software engineer for the WSL team.
Awesome. So we are here today to answer your pressing questions about WSL. You can pick the brains of the people who literally work on it every single day. As a reminder, if you want to go ask questions, go to ak.ms/AMA/WSL. So let's kick it off and start with a really fun one. This is from Jeremy. And Jeremy says, WSL has been a great asset and used every day in my development. I think it is still underappreciated, which is a shame. Anyway, I guess I'm curious, what does the future for WSL look like? We just got GUI apps on Windows 11, but is there anything else on the horizon and anything that one should look forward to? And I thought this was a great time to talk about WSL in the store and give an overview of kind of what that is and what our thinking is there. Ben, do you want to give that an overview?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Craig. So recently, I guess it was about a few months ago, we released what we've been calling a preview of Windows Subsystem for Linux in the Microsoft Store. And essentially what that is it's the same, the same WSL you know and love, but it is a different shipping mechanism. So you can think of it like we've essentially appified Windows Subsystem for Linux. So now we're able to ship new features, bug fixes independently from, the broader Windows ecosystem, which is desirable for us because it allows us to respond to customer feedback quicker, fix bugs more quickly, have more control over when we want to roll things out. Like we no longer are tied to the Windows release cycle. And and it's also we're our code is now undocked from Microsoft's, we call it the OS repo. It's the gigantic repo where all of Windows source code is. We're now completely undocked from that. And build independently, and so it's an exciting time to it's been a fun feature to work on. So I think it's good for us. It's good for the customer.
Yeah. So the idea is before as a customer when I use WSL, I would update only with a Windows update, right? And whereas now I can get my update anytime just by getting a new update from the store. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll push updates through the store servicing mechanism, and yeah, exactly. Awesome. Yeah, this is Maui. In case you're wondering, this is my dog, and he's always bothering everybody on meetings, and mostly me. But so that's
this is
Maui's
Maui, what do you think of our roadmap?
I don't know. Whenever I start talking, he thinks I'm talking to him though. So.
That's awesome. And then Owen, speaking of new faces, you joined the WSL team recently, right? What made you want to join WSL and what do you like so far about working on the team?
Yeah, it's actually funny because when I was in college, I just recently graduated this past May. And during my college computer science career, I was using WSL personally as a student. So then when I came out and joined Microsoft, I was extremely excited to get to work on this great thing that I had been using already as a user, as a customer. So it was great making that transition and getting to see how it works behind the scenes, and getting to mess with all the best parts of both Windows and Linux has been really rewarding for someone who enjoys that kind of systems programming stuff.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
Owen interned on my team the year previous too. So he wasn't working on WSL in his internship, and then he joined. And I remember when I said, "Oh, hey, welcome to the team. I think I'm thinking about putting you on WSL." His eyes kind of lit up. He was really happy. So.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. That's so exciting. I remember, same story for me. I kind of used it, and then I was really excited to start working on it when I started. It was really fun. The next question is from Riley Wood, which is, will WSL ever support Systemd? I primarily use WSL to test software as I develop it, and I am sad that I cannot easily test my Systemd services on WSL. Ben, do we have any comments for Riley?
Yeah, Riley, great question. That, I mean, we've heard this a lot, and if it was easy, we would have already done it, but that doesn't mean we're not working on it. So this is something that I've actually been in a lot of conversations this week about, like, hey, let's figure out the right way to roll this out. We've been engaged with Canonical on this topic. Like, they're very interested. I think somebody's now he's like growling. So we've been engaged with Canonical about this. There's Systemd maintainers that work at Microsoft that we've been collaborating with. So we're actively investigating this. And I think what the challenge will be is part of the appeal and like power of WSL is it's this lightweight environment that boots really quickly and like kind of goes away when you don't need it anymore. So it's, like, if you wanted a traditional VM, you can do that. If you want a full desktop OS, everything. But the trade-off there is it's grabbing a huge chunk of your machine's memory forever, right? WSL is like gives you most of that functionality, but it is only there when you're using it and it goes away. So that's going to be the interesting piece is how do we maintain our fast boot, sub 10 second, hopefully ideally sub 5 second boot along with Systemd, and how do we so essentially it's a hard problem. We're working on it. I've got a prototype of it. I think I've shared it with Craig, and I think he's played around with it. So it is happening. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, and I think it is challenging because there's just a lot of really interesting technical problems that WSL has compared to a traditional Linux environment. Like one of the cool ones is when you close your WSL window, we actually shut down the VM for you in the background to clean up resources. But obviously with Systemd running, Systemd has long-running services that it manages in the background. That can be a bit more challenging of, okay, when do you want this to close? And when do you want this to stay open? When should we close the VM without an explicit, I'm shutting it down?
Yeah, and you can imagine there's maybe not a one-size-fit-all approach that works for everybody, right? Like somebody may want their SSH server running all the time, so maybe they don't want their VM to go away because they want to connect to it from a different box. So those are the types of things we're trying to think about. Like what is a good default experience for people? Like what is going to be, maybe not perfect for everybody, but the best for most people. And then what knobs can we give people to tune it to be, like, oh, maybe I don't care about Systemd. Maybe I'm doing command line scripting stuff and I don't need it. Or, oh, I want this VM running basically all the time. It should run when I boot, So things like that is what we're really trying to nail down.
Yep, exactly. Cool. So please stay tuned for more Systemd updates. And great question. The next question is actually from me. I wanted to ask Owen, what's your favorite WSL feature that you've worked on so far? And then where can users actually try it out?
Yeah, so the features that I've worked on since joining the WSL team mostly relate to the -- mount feature. I've implemented the feature work for -- VHD and -- name. So if you want to mount a virtual hard disk through WSL, you can do that using WSL -- mount -- VHD. And if you want to assign that to a specific name for a mount point, you can do that using -- name.
So if I'm a naive, let's say I'm a naive user, and I'm not sure what exactly does -- mount do, and where could I actually try it out? Do I need to be on Windows 11?
No, you do not need to be on Windows 11 to try mount.
I know. I think you do. You do need to be on Windows 11.
Yeah,
and then to get the latest, to get VHD and name, you can use the store version, right?
Yes. Sorry, I got my versions mixed up.
No worries.
The Windows and store. Yeah, my bad.
Man, that really highlights like why we're so excited about having like the store version or the undocked version of WSL, because the versioning just becomes so much simpler. Like what version do you have? What version of Windows are you running? It would be much simpler if it was like, everybody's running the same version of the thing.
Right?
It's gonna make it easier to worry about customers, everybody.
Windows 11 and WSL in the store.
So what does -- mount do? Like what does that actual base command do?
That essentially mounts a disk that is already mounted through your Windows host machine and mounts it so that it is accessible and usable within the Linux side of WSL.
Awesome. So if I have a ext4 formatted hard disk, let's say, that I use when I dual boot to Linux, I can actually access that directly in WSL now.
Yeah,
that is pretty cool. That is awesome. Makes it really easy to switch back and forth between a full, let's say, Linux desktop environment if I dual boot, and then use those same files directly in WSL. Wow.
Yeah, it's a handy feature that I love to use myself even.
That's awesome. The next question I have is from Clive. It says, I work on a VPN and often find that I cannot access the internet due to not being able to connect to the internet whilst on the VPN. I have modern software and wondered if WSL could be more VPN friendly. So I can actually handle this and take a stab. If you are experiencing any technical problems with WSL, the best place to go is to github.com/Microsoft/WSL. That is, if you file an issue there, we literally, as on the WSL team, will be able to take a look, and basically that's your best bet for getting a fix. And we also have an amazing community, as you can probably see by all these questions on the AMA, of really talented and intelligent individuals who can also take a look at helping you with your problem. Let's talk specifically about VPN. So for VPN issues, the best recommendation so far that we've seen is to please update your VPN. So a great example is Cisco AnyConnect on versions prior to, I can't remember the exact string, but it was something like starts with 10 dot something. They released a new version that actually significantly improves WSL capability, internet capability. So I would make sure that you can check with your IT or just update your VM yourself if you're able. And then if the problem still exists, please go to github.com/Microsoft/WSL, and then you can file your issue there. And we're also taking a look at improving our networking story overall. So thank you very much for the question.
Yeah, networking, as anybody who's delved into networking in the past is well aware. Networking is a very complicated space. There's lots of network hardware. There's basically as many network adapters as there are PC, like different types of network adapters as there are PCs in the world, right? And like different the network topology and configuration is that we see on customer machines is just so varied and complex, and yeah, we are spending a lot of effort trying to resolve some of the specifically VPN issues tend to be a big pain point. But yeah, we're definitely looking at making that better as well. Yep.
And speaking of overall improvements, Andre Ondrej will reasonably fast access to Windows native file systems with full notified support from WSL2 be addressed anytime soon. One of the best features of WSL is interoperability and sharing data between Linux and Windows apps. Slow 9P and work around with WSL pseudo-networked file systems do not always work for them. Do you have any news on what we're doing to work on that situation?
Yeah, good question. And that's, I think you highlighted one of the reasons that, WSL is actually kind of interesting and unique, like aside from, the ability to run Linux on Windows, it gives you that coupling between, your Windows environment, your Linux environment. You can see all the files. Like I think that really highlights one of the strengths of WSL. And along those lines, I mean, it's something that we the 9P file server that we use, 9P is the protocol itself, I think, is like older than me. It has served its purposes fairly well, but it's definitely not going to win any speed races. So we are investigating adding support for more, I would call it more modern file system, remote file system options. So VirtIOFS is something that we're actively working on. We have, it's not done yet, but we have, branches where we have VirtIOFS support. We actually already use VirtIOFS in WSL for a small, for some features. So with WSL-G, we have shared memory between the host and the guest that allows, GUI apps to render really quickly. And, we don't have to send, all of the, contents of the GUI app over, a socket. We can have a shared memory buffer that both sides can interact with. We use VirtIOFS for that. So a lot of the functionality is already there. We just need to finish the work to start using that for host file system access. You mentioned notify support. That one's actually kind of interesting. So there, and this is something that may require us to work with the broader Linux community and come up with, what the right thing is there. So there actually, the way iNotify works at a high level, I'm sure there's like some kernel people that are going to be like, you're doing you're not
it's
right,
wrong.
like, stupid Windows guy. I've never read the Linux kernel source. They don't let me. So, but at a high level, iNotify works at the inode level. I think that's what the I probably stands for.
You're really brave,
which is,
Ben, by the way.
What's that?
I'm saying you're really brave.
Oh,
Going deep.
It wouldn't be the first time I'm yelled at by some guy with a longer beard than me. So iNotify works at the inode level, which is, if you think about file systems in Linux, iNotify is basically lower down. So like, let's say you have ext4, it's up here, and there's all these, there's reads and writes that get exposed through this layer that's called VFS. iNodes kind of exist it's like an internal kernel record keeping structure that they use. For example, they store a bunch of metadata in the inode. So if you had a file and you wanted to know who owns this file, what's the user, instead of going to the file and like reading that off of the disk, that data is all in this inode cache. Anyway, long story short, iNotify works at that layer, and there's not really a way for the file system layer to inject like, hey, I changed, by the way, notifications to the inode layer. So like what that means is you have a remote file server somewhere, you mount it somewhere else on a different machine. There's not a mechanism for the server to communicate those iNotify events to the client and inject them into the kernel in such a way that the clients will wake up and say, oh, that's oh, this file changed, I should refresh it. So if you use what is it called, SSHFS, is that like other remote file systems, they have the same problem, right? So it's something that I think this would be a great feature in the kernel. I mean, I think a lot of SMB, different things could definitely benefit from this. The problem is we can't, there's not some existing functionality that we can plug into right now. We'd have to kind of invent something, and that would be in the kernel, which is doable, but it's something that we've started kind of, we have kernel maintainers at Microsoft. I've had conversations with them about how such a thing would look. I think it'd be a good change. If somebody is listening today and they feel passionate about it, help us get some support. But yeah, and I hope that explains the problem, kind of hand wavy level, but that's basically why iNotify is hard. There's things you can do. Sorry, Greg, I keep talking. He's used to me just talking over him all day. People can work around this other way. So I know that you can kind of artificially inject iNotifies, like through, like, let's say you had a file server and you modified a file, and you wanted to let your client know, like, hey, this file changed. You could have some out of band message, and like something on the client could like actually touch that file to trigger the iNotify, right? But that's probably that's more a workaround, and that's not something that I think would really make sense for I think you could do certain types of iNotify events that way, but it wouldn't be very performant. You wouldn't get obviously delete, right? You don't want to delete the actual file and things like that. So,
and I think that there's also kind of a way that you have to change thinking about it from using WSL1 to WSL2 for some really interesting reasons. In WSL1, we worked on a translation layer. So everything was Windows API calls working on Windows files. And so a lot of people did do their work out of their Windows file system. And I think for WSL2, sorry, let me change that. I know for WSL2 that we are using it in a virtualized context with a virtual machine that uses the ext4 file system. And so now these are, from a technical implementation, different machines, right? Linux and Windows. And what's nice about that is, once you move to using the Linux file system and using Linux apps with Linux files, you get an really intense performance boost, right? Like 4 to 6 times faster for general file operations, like sudo apt update is really fast. Like you go from 2 minutes to install something like Python to like 30 seconds is really noticeable. And so what we are trying to do as much as possible is make it very comfortable to work from the Linux file system on Windows. And so I would urge you to, if this is a problem for you of using the cross-OS boundary, of course, there are still some scenarios where you might want to use both, like you're doing cross-OS compilation, for example. But as much as you can, please try putting your files into the Linux file system. And then there's an awesome slew of tools there, like VS Code Remote is amazing, to be able to go and use that. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, for sure. And
awesome.
VirtIOFS is coming. We will have some, we'll have some shared memory. We're looking at VirtIOFS with DAX support, DAX, which I think just stands for direct access. But anyway, it's basically a way of sharing the host's page file cache with the guest. So you're not transferring all of the data over, you're just like in the shared memory case, you're mapping a buffer that both the host and the guest can see. And then that'll really, if we get there, that'll really speed things up. Won't be as fast as native Linux file system, but it will be certainly faster than what we're using today. Yeah,
and I'm actually going to springboard this conversation to put in a question of my own that I got asked a lot, this is what is the performance difference between WSL and bare metal Linux, which is a great question. So we have done some internal tests, but my favorite that I'd like to point you to take a look at is Phoronix Labs. They are basically their own team. So we know I know the owner, but we don't obviously see them with any tests or anything like that. They're independent from Microsoft, and they run tests that compare WSL to bare metal Linux on the exact same machine with the exact same specs, which is really cool. And obviously, it's hard to give just one number for performance because it depends on so many things, like your use case, what are you doing, what machine topology do you have. But in general, if we wanted to analyze it, you pay about a 10% performance difference between WSL and bare metal Linux. So for developer applications, that's really similar. It's super comparable and pretty awesome that we can get it that fast. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. There's a little bit of performance penalty by running a hypervisor. There's a little bit, but it's less than 10% generally, which you won't really notice most of the time.
Yeah. So the next question is from Mike, and Mike says, "Can you share any plans for WSL to further enterprise controls that allow the WSL instance to be more in compliance and similar to the Windows host the WSL instance is hosted on?" So I'm going to take this question. And yes, we are taking a look at those features. So I'm just going to give an overview of kind of what WSL is today from a security and compliance perspective, and then give a quick teaser of what we're looking into to help improve that. So as of today, WSL actually can be considered the exact same security story as a traditional virtual machine or virtual environment. And so what that actually means is that the user has total control over what runs in that VM. And so you can run any Linux instance that you want inside of WSL and run any Linux binaries that you want. And then the other caveat is that the Windows host is unable to see what's running inside of that inside of that Linux instance. So they are actually two separate machines, right? They're two separate machines running on the same hardware. And so tools like Windows Firewall and Windows Defender are not looking at the WSL processes because they're running entirely different processes. And so what do people do to secure that right now? Well, people use either existing virtual machine rules. So they have regular assumptions about users who have privileges to use virtual machines, and you can apply those rules directly, and those will apply directly to WSL users. If you want to expand that, there are also users who actually do compliance checks with WSL. So one of the cool things that we can do with WSL is you can run wsl.exe and then space whatever Linux command that you want after it. And you can actually execute arbitrary Linux scripts with that. And so we do have customers who have made like a check my, WSL instance script.sh, and then using tools like Intune, you can run that using PowerShell for the user to check for compliance, like check, hey, are they running this distro? When was the last time they updated, etc. And so that's the current ways that people manage that right now. And if you're interested in the further aspects of it, we are working on those. Our goal is to basically add ways that you can monitor the WSL instance. And so those features are still being planned and in development. And if you are interested, you can and want to basically, if you're blocked on rolling WSL to your enterprise and want to roll it out, you can always email me at craig.lowen@microsoft.com. And you can ask me your specific enterprise questions there. Or reach me on Twitter, also Craig A. Lowen. Awesome.
Cool, Craig. I saw a good. So Jeremy, hey Jeremy, we've talked a lot. It's good to see you here. We've seen, you asked a good question about ARM64. You're very passionate about ARM. I remember at my build talk with Craig, right? Do you remember?
Jeremy Sinclair.
Yeah, Jeremy was sitting in the front and he asked about ARM. So hey Jeremy, ARM. Windows as a whole is really doubling down on ARM64. We recognize that it's very important to the overall ecosystem, and like definitely improving the performance is something that I am very interested in. So for sure, yes. I want if you're having problems with ARM, we should definitely address those. You mentioned WSA. So WSA is Windows Subsystem for Android, which is now available on Windows 11. I believe it's available to anybody on Windows 11. It's in preview still. It's not officially released. So we're kind of like the WSL store version. WSA is available in the store. But I wanted to share something that people might find a little interesting about WSA. Is that actually under the covers, the component that runs the Linux or Android virtual machine is actually the same kind of technology that powers WSL. So our team has worked really closely with the broader team that works on the Windows Subsystem for Android project, and that's been really fun to kind of you look at WSL a different way. And share code between the two. The team that's working on that Android project is much bigger than just my team. Like they've done lots of changes to Android and the graphic stack, the audio stack, everything. But like some of the core virtualization tech is the same as WSL. So that's been really cool to see our work get shipped in another product. So that's been fun.
Yeah, it's totally cool.
Yeah.
And
just plug,
if you haven't tried
WSA.
If you haven't tried WSA, Windows Subsystem for Android, try it out. It's really fun, and it's on Windows 11 to go take a look at.
Yeah, we also wanted to see my dog again.
Oh yeah, someone asked.
Reading through the chat, somebody said Maui.
Where's Maui?
Let's see if he'll behave. Sometimes he'll he's like 110 pounds, but he thinks he's a left. He's just over a year old. He's my little baby. Anyway.
This is great.
That's enough. That's enough, dog.
This is your scheduled halfway point of the AMA dog break.
It's always dog break time in this office.
The next question that I see is from Riley. Riley asks, do you have any plans to decouple WSL from UWP plus MSIX? I would love to see a much simpler process for authoring plus distributing WSL distros. So I want to take this question and say that, yes, we actually do have a method to do that existing today that you can go use right away. So there is a fun feature called WSL -import and WSL -export. You can go see how to use them if you just run WSL space --help. What these features do is allow you to export and import any Linux distribution that you'd like. And so these, when you import these, they don't use the UWP and MSIX mechanism. So they're imported directly to WSL and managed directly there. So what that means is you won't have a start menu application for them, but when you run WSL.exe, you'll still be able to use and interact with them. So the best way to learn about this is at our docs. If you go to aka.ms/WSL docs, You can go read up on there. We actually have tutorials of how you can import any Linux distribution, etc. But to use it technically, please go there. But to give you a flavor of what it does, you can actually take any tar file that represents Linux binaries or has a Linux distribution inside of it, and you can import that directly into WSL. And you can import it actually to any location that you want as well. So this lets you import WSL distros to different drives if you prefer to do that. Additionally, what's cool about it is this allows you to import different distributions that you want. So on our docs, we actually have a example of how to import CentOS as your own WSL distribution and use that. So there is a mechanism to do it. And if you wanted to export some of your own distros, you can just run wsl-export, and that will save the state. It'll package everything to a tar file and save it inside of that file, and you can import it later. So
yeah, and many distributions, like if you go to Canonical's website or like Alpine Linux's website, many of them have their images available for download in tar or tar-gz form already, right? So this is something that you can just you can pick your distro and find the one you want and then import it. So that's what I do for a lot of mine as well, because there's things like there's I'll have to run specific versions, and that version's not in the store, so you have to find it. So I use that a lot too.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up too, because not only do you get access to some distributions that aren't necessarily on the store, but you also get access to those versions that are up there, like Ubuntu like 16.04.
Yeah, exactly. This question is related, so I wanted to put this one out as well. From AG over 112 on YouTube. Any news on official distros on the Microsoft Store, other than the ability to install any distro manually? So we just talked about how to install those distros manually, but I wanted to talk about this one because there was a new official distro that was released on the Microsoft Store. So what that means is that the distro maintainers themselves, like Canonical, Debian maintainers, and in this case, Oracle Linux maintainers, decide to package their distro and upload it to the store as a store application. So Oracle Linux is now in the Microsoft Store, so you can go try that out and play around with it in WSL. So we're very excited and happy to welcome Oracle Linux to the WSL family on the store. So if you want to ever get started with Oracle Linux, then now's the perfect time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Next question that I see is from Nicholas. And it says, are there any plans to be able to easily open network ports from WSL accessible from the external network? And I wanted to touch on our networking story here and kind of dive a little bit deeper. So when we talk about WSL being a separate machine, it has its own Ethernet card, virtual Ethernet card, and its own IP address. And so what that means is we use NAT, so network address translation, to communicate with that WSL VM, and any packets that go to the WSL VM go first to the host and then are routed to the VM. And what that means is, if you ever, if you ever played Warcraft 3 and tried to host some of your own servers way back in the day, you might know something about port forwarding, but that's essentially what you need to do. You need to forward your ports from your host to outside on your external network. This is a little bit more challenging currently. So there's either you can use WSL1 if that use case works for you, or if you use WSL2, we have on our docs, aka.ms/WSL docs, the commands that you can use in Hyper-V to forward ports over. So that's something that you can use right now, and we are overall investigating that as part of our networking improvements. As we kind of talked about today, definitely a lot of questions about network, and it is something that we're investigating, improving for sure, and spending a lot of energy doing so.
Yeah, the two things, like as the dev lead for WSL, the 2 or 3 things I guess now that keep me up at night are like making enterprise support better, making host file system access better. We already talked about that for IOFS, and making our networking story better. Like those I think are kind of the 3 pain points that I think we, if we solve all those, the sky's the limit. I think we're, I think boundless potential.
Okay.
Unlimited power.
I was about to make that joke.
Craig and I are like, we share a brain.
I think we have the same nerd frequencies.
Yeah,
much too often.
It's fun.
The next question, also from Agrover112 on YouTube, says probably not required, but is there a way to disable WSLG? And so, yes, there is a way to do that. There is a config file that you can create. So if you go to your home users in Windows, so C/users/your name, and you create a .wsl config file, then you can add in there WSL2 and then enable GUI apps equals false, right? Is that the exact string?
Yeah. Which we have, so we have this config file, it has a bunch of knobs. They're all documented. I think we have, like, if you look at our docs, search for WSL config and you should find how to disable WSLG. So you can also, so that's if you don't want WSLG at all, like no WSLG, please. Like, I don't need it. You can also disable it on a per distro basis in the version of Microsoft of WSL in the store. And there's, I don't know if we've written that's pretty new. I don't know if we've documented that yet, but there will also soon be a way to disable WSLG on a per distro basis. So maybe you have a couple distros and you want Ubuntu to have WSLG and maybe you don't want Alpine to have it.
So that uses the /etc/wsl.conf file. Owen, can you give us an overview of what are the ways to configure WSL right now? What's the difference between using that .wsl config file in Windows and then my in Linux WSL.conf file?
Yeah, so your in Linux WSL.conf file is more of the distro specific configuration settings related to WSL, right? Whereas the .wsl config is more of like the system-wide settings for WSL, right? So when you, that's why when you are when we're talking about disabling GUI, you're doing it for, because it's in WSL .wsl config, that affects the whole system. Whereas, if we were to pursue the route of making that maybe an option within your per distro based configuration file, you could turn on for certain distributions and not for others. But yeah, it's an important thing that I'm glad you brought up, because I think there's a good reason to distinguish between the two types of WSL config files.
Yeah. Another thing to kind of touch on, like, I love config files. I'm like, a curmudgeonly like command line dude. Like, I'm shocked.
What? You work on WSL and you love the command line?
Yeah, I don't know. I love it. But we do recognize that, like, in order to use it, you need to find our docs. You need to, and then you need to create the text file, and there's a little bit of a barrier of entry there. And there's some things in there that I think are useful knobs, like disable WSLG. So one thing that we're also looking at is exposing those settings and others, via a some kind of UI, some kind of settings UI, similar to what the terminal team recently did. Like our one of our partner teams is the Windows terminal team. And for a long time, they had, they use JSON because, they're not, they use a modern parsing format. Anyway, JSON's great. I like JSON. But yeah, so they for a long time just had, a string config file, but then they got a lot of feedback from users like, oh, we'd like a GUI to edit these things. And we're investigating the same thing, because I think there's lots of knobs in there, like, how much memory do you want to give the WSL VM? How many processors? Like, we talked about systemd support. Yes, do you want systemd or not? Like, there's lots of knobs that I think would be useful to expose to people at, a more accessible, like, self-documenting way, right? Like, not just buried in some config file that probably doesn't even exist on your machine, so you have to create it yourself. Like, we want to make that experience a lot better. So that's something we're also looking at. No timeline, but like we're like systems programmers, so our first GUI apps might be a little rough. I think Owen will do a great job, I'm sure. But it's
oh, and how's your design work?
yeah. Like, hey, I know you've been writing C and C++. How do you feel about WPF? Or I know nothing about UI frameworks. WinUI is WinUI the thing? Craig, you know.
Yeah, WinUI.
WinUI 3 is that where?
WinUI 3. Yeah.
I literally know nothing about it. The last time I did any kind of graphic stuff was in like college. So
that's the fun. You get to learn.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Lots of learning.
Please don't ask me to design or anything or choose colors because it'll look terrible.
Dude, I ask you to do that all the time. I'm like, hey, Craig, we need an icon.
And I find someone who knows how to design, make things look good.
Craig wears many hats. He's our, when my Photoshop skills aren't good enough, Craig and mine are never good enough.
Oh man, yeah, my favorite was Photoshop in high school. Just messing around with it. That's the only reason I can use it today. And actually, it's been really fun using it in GUI apps because I use GIMP a lot. And so having Linux GUI apps, I use GIMP from WSL, which is a good time.
Yeah, funny story about GIMP. A couple years ago, so this was before we actually had WSLG. I was able to go with Rich Turner, one of your colleagues, to SUSECon in Prague, which was, amazing. It was Prague is a great city. And we were there representing Microsoft at this Linux convention, right? So we had a lot of sideways glances, but a lot of people most people were very welcoming and like, hey, what is WSL? What the heck? But one thing that we were playing with is we were running, I did like a benchmark of the Windows version of GIMP versus the Linux version of GIMP running in WSL. And they were like almost identical performance. It's there was a little bit of slowdown because we were using like X11, but just over TCP. So I'm pretty confident that today, like with WSLG, the Linux version of GIMP would be very usable. It's amazing how usable it was even 3 years ago. So,
and that relates to this question from David on YouTube. David asks, I'm stuck with Windows 10 and I use MOBA Xterm already. WSL 1 works fine for GUI apps, but I'm not able to use WSL 2. I can't seem to set the display properly no matter what I add to .bashrc. Any advice? So the best advice is if you use Windows 11, you get out-of-box GUI app support that is integrated with Windows. So it gives you a really awesome experience. And what I mean by that is whenever you install an app, you get it in your start menu. All of your apps can use Wayland and X11 support. And there's nothing you need to configure. It's just out of the box. So you're able to use it right away. David, to unblock you specifically, you just need to point your display variable to your host IP address. So there's lots of tutorials online. I would just look up like Windows 11, I would just look up, WSL2, set up GUI apps. But that's what you need to do. You just take a look at /etc/resolve.conf. You'll see name server that gives you your host IP, set your display variable to that, and then you should be off to the races.
Yeah, the other thing you may need to do is I'm not very familiar with MOBA Xterm, but I know with some of the other X servers, you may need to run them in it's some kind of permissive mode. I know the command line option for for what's the one that we always use internally? I can't remember what it's called. Xming, yeah, Xming. I know I think it's like -IC, which basically it allows connections from a different IP address, right? Which your VM is going to have. It's not going to be localhost. It's going to be a different IP address. So I think if you have the right bashrc setting, your display set up correctly, you may need to run your X server with to allow connections from other IP addresses. That might be it. But yeah, like Craig said, I think we like GUI apps are something that we do fully support in in WSL in Windows 11. So
yeah, good question. The next is from Raymond on YouTube. Can you comment on the plans to improve the cleanup and progress on all of the outstanding GitHub issues? So fantastic question. I think the challenge for our team on that is WSL is a really broad tool, right? WSL you can use for essentially any Linux application is what you can start using it for. And we want to have anything be available on GitHub for users to look at. And even if it's something that's challenging or is a long-term project, we want to err on the side of keeping it open so the community can take a look rather than closing it and closing off the discussions. And so there are some definitely long-standing issues that exist in our GitHub that are great places for people to talk about the issue and determine workarounds. And so we tend to lean more on leaving them open. That being said, we are taking if you take a look at the actual repo itself, and over time, we look at it once a week. We do close out a lot of issues and ask for feedback and get logs. The best thing that you can do as a user is if you post any issues, please provide logs and fill out the whole template, and then that will put us in the best position to be able to help you. And then if you have questions overall or have feedback, importantly, about what you'd like to see, reach out to us on Twitter. Our Twitter names are right here, and you can give us some specific guidance of, hey, I'd like to see this, or what about taking a look at this issue? That's really helpful. Awesome. And then what was the next question? There was one more that I wanted to take a look at. The next question is show dog.
I already showed the dog. He's very comfortable right now. He's being a good boy, so I don't want to wake him up.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that so the next question that I see is talking about memory consumption for WSL, and that's related to the GitHub issue one of, hey, there hasn't been an update directly on that issue. What's the story for memory consumption in WSL?
Yeah, do you want me to take that one, Craig?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. So I'll describe the problem a little bit. So typically, let's say you're running WSL, you're building some big project. You notice that there's this process on the host called VMM. That what VMM is, WSL uses this technology that is called VA-backed VMs, and VA means virtual address, right? So there's a couple different kinds of VMs. There's physically backed, where we carve off like 4 gigs, and the host no longer has it. The guest, is free to do whatever they want with that 4 gigs. VA-backed VMs is we create a process on the host that allocates and frees memory dynamically, right? So if you can assign up to a maximum amount to a VA-backed VM, and then that process will grow and shrink as it's using memory and freeing memory. So for Windows has a bunch of container scenarios that also use VA-backed VMs. If you're on Win 11 and you look through like Task Manager, you'll see a couple VMM processes, and one of them is maybe WSL. Others of them are Windows Sandbox, different things like that. Windows Defender, Application Guard, things like that. On Windows, since it's Windows on Windows, there are some very, very cool. So there's this team called the Container Manager team that's done a lot of this work. There's enlightenments from the host kernel to the guest kernel that talk really closely about a couple things. One is like scheduling. So they're thread scheduling. There's I'm forgetting what the name, integrated scheduling, I think is what they call it. So basically the guest communicates information to the host about like, hey, here's the priority of the various threads. You should schedule them this way. Without that information, the host will just schedule virtual processors for the VM and run them at normal priority all the time. There's no insight like what's important or what's not in the guest. It just runs them. So that's a traditional VM. Since with Windows, there's those hints like, hey, I have a very important task, high priority, run this more. They also have memory hints, and they do a bunch of different kind of hinting. They do cold hinting, which says, hey, this page I'm kind of done with. You can maybe page this out if you're under memory pressure. Discard notifications, like this memory, I no longer need this memory. Like you can completely get rid of it. And then even hot hints like, hey, this page is very active right now. Maybe keep this, in the cache, or definitely don't page this out. So the problem with WSL and running a Linux guest in general is we don't have that those enlightenments from the Linux kernel. So there's no way for the Linux kernel running in a virtual machine to communicate to the host information like that about thread priorities or memory information other than just like used or free. So that's kind of the problem space. We're investigating adding some enlightenments, that like this is another area where teams are very interested in making Linux a better tenant OS, like on, this would even benefit, KVM and Linux virtualization scenarios, right? So like assume maybe in the future, someday the Linux kernel will have the ability to, issue hints to in some kind of hypervisor environment. That would benefit everybody, not just us. So something we're looking into. But what ends up happening is, we have, you have your VMM process. It's used a bunch of RAM. That RAM is all, being held up by this VMM process. And essentially it's, we have this commit, and most of this commit is in the is page cache. So it's basically read, you've read files, for performance reasons, you don't want to keep going to disk or VHD to read this file over and over again. So the Linux kernel stores the file in memory, and it thinks it says, hey, I've got 16 gigs, I'm going to use it, right? Like since it doesn't really know, it doesn't really know that it's running in a virtual machine, and that, memory is something that they really need to be careful about. So, so that being said, we do some things to try to make things better. Periodically, we do something called memory compaction, which which basically, you can think of it like defragmenting. Like it lets you, organize allocations in the guest, and basically, tries to group them together so there's large contiguous regions that are free. And Linux does have this concept called cold discard hints. Which we do send to the host, and then basically you can say, hey, I'm done with this memory. That's why compaction is useful. Is you want to give big regions that you can say, hey, host, you can reclaim this. But the granularity is 2 megs, which is, you can imagine, if you have a lot of small allocations that you may not be able to find very many of 2 megabyte regions inside in your VA to give back to the host. Anyway, that being said, we're looking at a lot of different things. Like one thing that we're investigating is, some kind of heuristic to drop caches periodically. You don't want to do it all the time, because that cache is there for a reason. Like if it's not in cache, next time it's going to disk. So that's very, orders of magnitude slower. But if the host is under memory pressure, might not be the worst thing to do to, get some memory back for things on the host. So we're investigating a lot of different, things to do there. But anyway, I hope that makes sense. It's just kind of it's a complicated problem, like anything. That's why it's fun to work on. But but yeah, that's kind of the problem space, and it's I think there's a lot more we can do. Like I'm not happy with how much memory we use, and how we tend to hang on to it longer than we need to. So it's something I'm trying to address.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
The next question is from Chad. I saw this on TechFeed and also on Twitter. And it's, how do you toggle WSL2 containers with Podman instead of Docker Desktop? And so I just kind of want to quickly chat about what's that landscape look like there for this. So Docker Desktop is a really awesome tool to use Windows containers with WSL. And what's great is it has direct WSL integration. So what's powerful about using Docker Desktop is you can share your containers across all your WSL distros and across Windows. So now when you use docker.exe in Windows, it is actually running in WSL in the background. It's really cool in the sense that it's integrated and you can use it from any environment that you want. And so specifically for this question is, it's kind of also the question of how is that different from running Docker inside of your WSL environment? And the actual difference is you could go into like an Ubuntu distro or any distro that you want and install something like the Docker engine directly in that distro. And then you could run like sudo service docker start and interact with Docker containers that way. And in that sense, it would act exactly like a Linux distribution is. The difference between using that and Docker Desktop is mainly the integration. So Docker Desktop, what it's actually doing is it creates its own WSL distros, Docker Desktop and Docker Desktop data. And then it basically uses the power of Docker Desktop.exe to route information from those distros to your other Linux distros and to Windows Docker Desktop.exe. So mainly it's the integration piece. To answer your specific question of how you toggle WSL2 containers, I would say that the best way is just install them directly into your Linux distribution. You can have multiple Linux distros if you want, and if you want to use Podman in one, and then use Docker Desktop and have Docker Desktop integration to Windows in another, it's very easy to set up. So it should be pretty trivial to get that going. Anything you want to add, Ben or Owen? Did I miss anything? All right.
Sounds good.
From Nuno. Hi, Nuno. Nuno is just saying hi to the wonderful team and asks, when will we have CBL Mariner in the Microsoft Store?
the WSL Corsair. Hey, Nuno.
Nuno, hi. Yeah, so...
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Well, I mean, hark back to our earlier question, you can use the CBL Mariner right away if you want to, just by using WSL -import. And another fun fact is that we actually do use CBL Mariner in WSL. So this has kind of been a really fun architecture talk today almost. But we have, if you go to ak.ms/WSLG, you can take a look at the GitHub repo for how GUI apps work on WSL. And in there, you can find basically information about the architecture. What we actually do is we run a system distro that works. Whenever you run a distro, we run a basically distro parallel to it. And that distro is running on CBL Mariner. So it all is already integrated, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think we should ask them about. I know they were looking at it. I know they want to get CBL into more hands. We should maybe help them get a CBL distro in the store if they want.
Yeah. So great question.
Yeah, I'd be down. That sounds good.
And then from Clive, who asks, I run on WSL on Windows 10. If I run WSL-update, will I be running the latest version that is available on Windows 11 via the Windows Store, or is Windows 10 support being left behind? In the Windows Store for Windows 11, do you supply a What's New section so people know the difference? This is a really good question. Yeah. So right now, to use the store version, you need to be on Windows 11. It is not supported on Windows 10. However, that is something that we're interested in and we're currently investigating. We don't really have any updates or timelines yet beyond, hey, we're looking into this. If you go to a Windows Insiders build right now for Windows 11, so this is the latest of what we're working on, you will notice that WSL -install now installs WSL straight from the Microsoft Store. Additionally, if you're using the inbox version, we put in a notification saying, hey, you can go use the store version. All you have to do is run WSL -update. So, Clive, for your question, our goal is eventually when you're going to be using the desktop version, you're going to upgrade, and our upgrade story, we want it to just be run WSL -update. And that should be as easy as it is to get the store version, which is, we think really quick and simple. So yeah, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. Okay. The last question that we're going to take is from Nuno, which is, will it be possible to have other root file systems for the distros? So, i.e. ButterFS. Really interesting question. I want to harken back to Owen talking about --mount, because this is kind of a cool way that you can kind of work around that right now, which is you can mount any drive, and then you can use different file systems that are supported by the Linux kernel using --mount. So there are ways that you can use other root file systems right now, but you might not directly be using it in your root file system.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Craig. I wanted to touch on that too, right? So there's what you said, there's a way to get around it using --mount and that. Yeah,
and then you could use it in a VHD style too, right, Owen? So you could actually make, if you wanted to play around with, let's say, BTRFS, right? Is it ButterFS? I've heard it.
I think I usually
better. I call it better.
Better. Okay.
Better.
Okay.
I mean, say however you want to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's better.
Right. It's fun to play around with. It's a good file system.
Right.
Yeah. I will say that until recently, so with the inbox version of WSL, it would not have been possible. But with lifted WSL, we actually could. So I've seen this request before. I've seen a couple different, BetterFS tends to be the biggest ask, but that's an interesting idea, because essentially when you import a distribution, the first thing we do, we take a VHD, we format it, right? And then we lay out the files, and that's it. So we could. So we'll have to brainstorm about that. I think that could be an interesting use case. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Nuno, offline, if you want to sync up and tell us why you want BetterFS other than just playing with stuff, that'd be great.
Yes, please do. You can reach us on Twitter any day. So we are at time. Thank you so much to everyone who asked questions, and thank you to anyone who tuned in. This has been a really fun chat, and we're really excited to deliver more WSL features and hear your feedback. If you want to follow up, there's always Twitter is probably the best place to reach Ben or I, and ask us any WSL questions there. And thank you so much for your time today, and have a good rest of your week. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.